Hello, I'm Aaron Cohen. Welcome to Sanctuary. Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, begins the evening of September 8th. Yom Kippur, a day of repentance and fasting, follows 9 days later. Together, these are the high holidays. In the words of one central prayer, we ask, who shall live and who shall die? Whose life cut short and whose life lived full? On Yom Kippur, the answers are inscribed and sealed in the Book of Life. Joining us today on Sanctuary are three chaplains. Like their colleagues who are synagogue rabbis, they too are preparing for what we call the days of awe. But for their congregants, the elderly, the sick, the dying, the high holidays can take on intense new meaning as they pray to be inscribed in the Book of Life. How does the special perspective impact the way chaplains process the message of the high holidays? Joining us today are Rabbi Joseph Ozarowski, chaplain for the Jewish Healing Network of Chicago, Rabbi Suzanne Griffel of the Midwest Palliative and Hospice CareCenter, and Rabbi Michael Schorin of CJE SeniorLife. Thanks to all of you for being here today. And I guess the first question that we should cover is, what is a chaplain? People are generally familiar with synagogue rabbis, that's who they often encounter, but you encounter a chaplain under special circumstances. Rabbi Griffel, you want to just explain to us briefly who a chaplain is and what the duties can be?
Sure. Well, as you have already heard from the introduction, chaplains work in a variety of settings, and I think what we have in common is that we work with people who are in intense times of their life and times when they're especially vulnerable. Other settings in which chaplains work, in addition to the ones we represent, are in the military and in prisons. And even though those situations are different, there are also periods, and often prolonged periods, of heightened vulnerability. And really what chaplains are there for is to be with people in the journeys that they're in. Some people refer to Jewish chaplaincy as livui ruchani, or spiritual accompaniment.
And I know that the three of you have served congregational roles before going into chaplaincy. What prepares a clergy person to be a chaplain? Was the work that you did in the congregational world, the synagogue world, good preparation, or were there things that you discovered? Rabbi Ozarowski, tell me about your path.
I think part of what led me to chaplaincy was the pastoral piece of the congregational work that I did. I was in congregational work for over 20 years. I still have a small shul that I serve in Minnesota. And the idea of being with people in their times of need, times of illness, times of suffering, I found very, very satisfying. It led me to some of my graduate work. I picked up a doctoral degree literally in the subject. And I began to experiment with chaplaincy while I was still a congregational rabbi on the East Coast.
And Rabbi Schorin, what about your path to this work?
For me, my desire to work as a chaplain goes back further. It goes back to my days at the Jewish Theological Seminary, where one of the major efforts we had was studying texts, biblical, Talmudic, medieval. And what I found is I was curious to study the texts of a human being, to study the Ur text, their foundation, and then what they did with that and what it meant to them. So, aided by a process called CPE, or Clinical Pastoral Education, I embarked on my desire for chaplaincy at that point.
In Jewish tradition, in the civilizational tradition as well as in the religious tradition, there is much that is said about the mitzvot, the commandments and good deeds around visiting the sick and providing comfort. When someone is ill, we wish them refuah shlema. Some of you, perhaps a little bit more than others, deal with those for whom there will be no refuah shlema, complete recovery. Hospice work, for example. So Rabbi Griffel, what do you find that is particular in dealing with those who are not going to recover, and of course their families as well?
Well, the kind of motto of the organization I work for, Midwest Palliative and Hospice CareCenter, is it's about living every step of the way. And I think one of the things that we talk about all the time among the colleagues and also with our patients and their families is the fact that while you're alive, and how do you maximize the quality of life? And one of the things, especially at the end of life, how do we help people make meaning out of their lives? One of the things that we do is a process called life review, where we help people look back and see that their lives have really had meaning so that their death can be more peaceful. One of the other things that we sometimes do, and this kind of goes along with the theme of this being around the Yamim Noraim, the days of Oz, if there are unresolved issues that people have, either between themselves and another person or between themselves and God, we try to help bring some resolution to that. Again, so that they can have a peaceful passage.
Yeah, Rabbi Ozarowski, you may be dealing with people at any stage of the spectrum of illness or at any point in their life, not necessarily end of life, although you do that as well. Does chaplaincy have a different nuance when you are working with those who, God willing, will recover from an illness?
I think the overriding theme might be how we define the word refuah, which is a term you just mentioned. There are all sorts of texts in Torah and rabbinic literature on refuah. It's often translated as a cure, and some of the old prayer books use that, but that's not an accurate translation. It's often translated as healing, and that's probably closer to it, but healing could mean many different things to many different people. I think the Hebrew term refuah is also related to another Hebrew word that sounds very similar to it with a slightly different spelling. The word is rafa, resh pei he, which means to ease or to alleviate or to palliate, as in palliative care. And so we may not always be able to seek a cure. And as it's often said, we sometimes say it, the people we work with say it, life is essentially a terminal illness, because we all eventually get to that point of meeting our Maker, and that is one of the overriding themes of the Yamim Noraim. But we can always ask God and share with each other the prayer and the hope for alleviating the suffering and finding meaning, as Rabbi Griffel admitted.